Hello. Today we are going to be doing my division mystery lesson. And I am really not going to do much of the teaching on this one. I'm really just going to remind you of a couple of things. And then I'm going to kind of send you off to see if you can do this. This is going to be the huge part of this. And if you come up with anything here, I'm basically going to be calling it your system. And tomorrow in the review, I'm just going to kind of brag about you to everybody on video. So I guess we'll see who gets all the good bragging, because I know somebody in this class is smart enough to figure it out. But before we talk about division, we should really talk about the opposite of division, which is the inverse operation, multiplication, because as we know, they are related. Sometimes we call them opposites, sometimes we call them frenemies. They work together sometimes they hate each other. Sometimes multiplication takes division's sweaters and doesn't bring them back clean. There's a lot of stuff going on. But let's start with multiplication. And see if we can figure out some of this stuff together. So let's start with what we do know. We know 4 groups of a half. And we can model that by drawing 4 halves. And if we drew 4 halves, we would get 2 wholes. Of course, if we did the math with that, even if we didn't cross cancel, we would get 4 divided by 2, which is 2. The math checks out, and the model checks out. But what if I had 3 groups of 1/4? Well, let's draw this a little differently, because 1/4 are harder to envision. So let's draw 1 hole here. This is 1 hole. And let's show that this is 1/4, and this is 1/4, and this is 1/4. So if I had 3 groups of 1/4, I would have 3 fourths. And again, if we were to write the math out like we are experts at now, we would get the same answer. Those two should feel pretty easy inside your brain. Excuse me, guys. But what if I had 5 groups of 2.5? Well, this time, rather than a model, I'm just going to kind of stick to the numbers. And here's why. To me, 2.5 feels pretty easy to figure out in my head. I know, for example, that if I had $2 and a half a dollar and $2 and a half a dollar, I could take my halves and I could make 1 whole dollar. And then separately, I could take my $2 and my $2 and make $4. And so, with very little mental issue, I could then take and get 5. But what would the math look like? Well, my cousin Joe showed us that in a video last week. He would take this number and change it to an improper fraction, which we can see would be 5/2. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 5/2. He would then get 25/2. Mr. Courtney messed up again. It's so terrible. And this would be 12.5, because 12.5 plus 12.5 is 25. So what did I do? Oh my goodness, guys. You know what I didn't do? I didn't draw my model. I kept going on, and look, at the one time I thought I was too smart. I should have drawn my model, guys. You know what? Let's draw 2.5. Oh, I get it. Look at that, everybody. I was supposed to do that 5 times. I got to learn to draw my models, guys. 2.5 plus 2.5 plus 2.5 plus 2.5. How many times? 5 times. Plus 2.5. That's a much better model. 2.5 plus 2.5 is 5. 2.5 plus 2.5 is 5. And look at that. 5 plus 5 is 10. And 2.5 more is 12.5, which, as we can see, is half of 25. So 12.5 must be the answer. So even on something a little bit more complicated, I can do the math, I can show the model, I can do the math, show the model, I can do the math and show the model. Well, here's where it's going to get tricky, because I'm going to take this exact situation, except I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to take 4, but instead of timesing it by a half, I'm going to divide it by a half. Instead of 3 times a fourth, I'm going to do 3 put into groups of a fourth. Aha, notice how I said that. And instead of 5 times 2.5, I'm going to do 5 put into groups of 2.5. And we're going to say that one more time because this is essential. Like we talked about the last video, language is everything. 4 put into groups of a half. 3 put into groups of a fourth. And 5 put into groups of 2.5. Well, here's where the video is about to end, because all I'm going to show you is the first model. I'm not going to do the math, and I'm not going to show you the models of the math for the other two. Instead, I'm going to give you a challenge. But let me talk about the model first, and then I'll give you that challenge. So first of all, what does it mean to take 4 and put them into groups of a half? Well, I'm going to start with my 4. And then, as the language tells me, I'm going to put it into groups of a half. So here's a half and a half. Here's a half and a half. These two pieces are now halves. So all of my pieces are now halves. So I've taken 4 and I've put them into groups that are half big. Now, how many groups do I have? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have a total of 8. Now, that's a very different answer than this one. This one was 4 groups of a half. You had a half and a half and a half and a half, and that made 2. This time, though, we took 4 and we put them into groups of a half, and we wound up with 8. And here's what I need you to see if you can figure out. How do we do the math to arrive at 8? Can you figure out a way to solve the math so that you get an answer of 8? We know what the math looks like for this one, but not this one. And I also want you to try this model. I'm going to draw the very beginning of it. I'm going to draw 3, and I'll bet you can put them into groups of a fourth. But can you solve the math? And then I'm not going to draw the model on this one. I'm not going to draw the 5 and put them into groups of 2.5, but I know you can. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, if you can do both of these models, that's proficient. That's really, really good. That's about, I would think that's pretty much an A+. But if anybody out there can figure out what math is working, even if you don't know why, I would be pretty impressed. And I'd like to hear about it in the comments. You can show a picture or a video or whatever you want to explain to me what you did and how you think it might be working. I'll take a look at it and we'll discuss it tomorrow. All right, everybody, good luck. Here's your work, and happy math taking, and I will look forward to seeing what you do. Bye for now.